How is everybody? Yeah? I'm so excited I get to be back with you again today. That was unexpected, but God totally knew, right? And I was telling Pastor Amy in the back this morning that when I was on the plane, I had so much I wanted to share with you that I kind of wanted another session with you. So I got it. Well, I just want to say that last night was so interesting for me because usually I have my outline and I do due diligence with that so I can really stay connected to you and how you're feeling about what I'm saying and the feeling I'm getting from you. And last night was so different because I left my notes, if you remember, at the pew. My husband said on the phone last night, "I'm so proud of you that you left it there, you listened to God." And I felt like I was so tuned in to like where he wanted to go. So it meant so that I felt like I wasn't sure how it was coming to you. So it meant so much to see some of your quotes on Twitter last night when I, got back to my room and went to bed, that it was resonating with some of you. So thank you for that. I just been thinking about, I'm really excited for this afternoon. I'm just thinking about how much breakthrough God has for us. And I heard this morning was awesome with Pastor Kathy about the soil, and I love gardening, and so I can't wait to listen to her talk. And she's seen my garden. She knows I love gardening. But I just feel like God is so in the details of this conference. Remember last night how I said I put on a different blouse than what I was gonna wear? Well, a young gal came up to me afterwards and said, "You wore that blouse for me because it so reminds me of my sister who passed away a year ago, and I felt like she was with me all night," and she started crying. And I just feel like that is so God, that, the simplest, littlest thing that he prompts us to do that we so easily want to go, that can't be God. And yet he's doing something in it, right? And so I want God to just keep doing that in this session this morning. Let's pray. Lord, I ask that you would just break open even more in this place. That as we talk about weeds and barriers and things that keep us from full growth and potential, Lord, that you would supernaturally just come into this place and you would just start to weed these things out of our life. That in our desire, Lord, to have the weeds out of our life, God, you would just quickly move and there would be a supernatural thing that would happen in this place today. Lord, I take authority over my cough, that it cannot be on this stage with me. And Lord, we just take authority over all sickness that is coming against the women in this conference, because this conference is about healing. It's about being those aloe plants that can regenerate when they're broken off, and just being that wonder, miraculous existence that can give so much and never be done giving. So God, we just step into that place and we ask that you would just have your way this afternoon. Just do whatever you want to do. Just however goofy it is, however serious it is, however unexpected it is, you get to do whatever you want to do. Amen. Okay, so remember how I was talking about an artichoke last night with you? I wanted to show you a picture of an artichoke in my garden. I took this photo last year because artichokes are kind of funny plants. Can you plant anything in Texas? Or does it all die in the summer? I hear it's really hot here in the summer. How many of you plant artichokes in your garden? Oh, not many. No one, actually. Okay, so I'm glad I brought a picture. Do you all know what an artichoke looks like? I'm just joking. So artichokes are so funny because they have these big leaves that come out of the base, and then this like random stem comes up and it has an artichoke head at the top. And then this fuzzy stuff starts to come out, it's got a little purple mohawk. And everyone that walks by our garden in the summer says, "This is a Dr. Seuss garden," if I've ever seen one, because it looks like a Dr. Seuss plant. But I wanted to show this to you because I'm so captured by all the different folds that make us one. You know, all the different pieces of who we are. We're not just one thing, we're several things all together, and how that unfolds in our life. But in the midst of that, there are barriers that come into our life, right? There are creative barriers, there's intimidation, there's weeds that get in. And so I want to start this morning talking about some of the common barriers that we face in our life, the common weeds that come into our garden. It's called growth barriers that choke life. That's the first half, and then the second half you're gonna like. So the first barrier, the first weed that some of us know so well is perfectionism. Anybody deal with perfectionism? Perfectionism is insane. It expects that everything we do be perfect the moment we do it. There's no room for error. There's no room for practice. It's just got to be perfect or don't do it, right? Does anybody recognize those voices? As an artist, as a working artist, I really struggle with perfectionism because everything in my humanity wants to only create if I'm going to create something perfect. I don't want to take that picture unless it's going to be perfect, right? I don't want to write that book unless it's going to be perfect. I need it to be perfect. What is the matter with me? Why do I need things to be perfect? It's ridiculous, right? I have this saying in my life that I love that I got from Julia Cameron. She wrote The Artist's Way, and that book is like my creative Bible. It's called The Artist's Way. For those of you who are artists in this room, you will love that book. One of her phrases in that book is progress, not perfection, is what we should be asking of ourselves. Progress, not perfection. So the other day, Brian comes up to me, and the kids are with my mom and dad. And he's like, we're just gonna have just a fun night tonight at home together. We're gonna do something different. So he gets his guitar, and he's just started taking guitar lessons. He's played the guitar forever, but he's never actually taken lessons. So he gets his guitar out, and he opens this bottle of champagne, and he says, I want you to sit down at the piano, because he knows I used to play piano when I was little. I have not played the piano in like 15 years, right? But it sits in our house. And so he's like, I want you to play the piano while I play the guitar. It's gonna be so romantic. We're just gonna make music together. I'm like, you're joking, right? You need a case of champagne for me to do that. I'm not doing that with you. And so I'm just like, no, this is not my idea of fun. And he's like, well, you're the one who's always talking about progress, not perfection. So I'm trying to create some oxygen in your life to just be creative without it like our bills being paid depending on it. Nobody's listening. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do this. This is so nerve-wracking. I feel sick. I wanna throw up right now. And so I literally over the years of learning to play the piano, I always learned with sheet music. I never, ever sat down and learned how to improvise on the piano. So I can play like Beethoven, but as long as I have the sheet music, right? He's like, no, I want this to come from your heart, Mira. I'm like, great, And so I'm sitting at the piano, and he, hands me the glass of champagne, and he's like, just drink it down right now. I can tell you're totally stressed out. And I'm like, it's not gonna help. And so I drink it down, and he starts playing, and I start yelling at him. And I'm like, Brian, I can't stand you right now. Why are you making me do this? This is my husband. Huh? I can't hear you. He is like a golden retriever. Any of you seen a golden retriever? It's like an eternity smile on his face. So he's just like, I can't hear you. I'm waiting for you, honey. I'm waiting for you to make music with me. Okay, so what is the big deal? It's not like anybody's listening. I'm with the safest person in my life, my husband. Neighbors aren't standing at the door. Nobody even knows what we're doing. But you see what I'm saying? This need to be perfect, to not want to be foolish, to look foolish, to sound foolish. That is a weed we got to get out. And so we started playing together, and it sounded ridiculous. I'm not joking you. It sounded so silly. But as we started playing, I started actually having fun. And he got more into it, and I got more into it, and I was like, oh yeah, So then we did this another time when the kids weren't home, and then we decided to do it once when the kids were home. And I was really nervous because I was like, kids have never really heard Mom play the piano. We've had a piano in our house their whole life, and they don't even know probably what it does. So I'm like, let's just do this. So we sit down, and Brian and I start doing this. We don't say anything to the kids. Blaze comes in, and he lays on the couch, and when we're done, he's like, Mom, that was the most beautiful thing ever. Now, he's so sweet. Like, he knows what to say, right? But it was opening this room for air in our home. I cannot tell my kids to go for it if I don't go for it myself, right? So it was opening this room for air. Blaze really wants to play the drums. He's been asking for 2 years to play the drums. I'm like, every boy wants to learn to play the drums. He's gonna like grow out of this phase, right? Well, he hasn't grown out of it. So the other day he says to me, he knows his mom so well. He's like, Mom, if I took drum lessons, wouldn't it be cool if like when I'm in junior high, I could be playing on the worship band at church? Well, who's gonna say no to drum lessons? Because now I'm like keeping him from being on the worship team. So guess what we did Saturday for his birthday? We took him to drum lessons. So I told Brian, I said, it's all your fault bringing music into our home now. And so now, guess what Pascaline wants to learn how to play? Electric guitar. But getting that weed and being intentional about getting perfectionism out of our life, out of our home, because it pops up again and again and again, leaves so much room. I can't believe the creative growth that is happening inside of our family right now from just that crazy exercise Brian and I did together. The next weed I want to talk about is one that I know all of you know really well too. It's guilt. Guilt. Guilt is like one of those, it's like that cousin that just won't stop visiting, right? It's always there every morning. And what's crazy about it is you start to kind of feel good about it being around. Okay, so here's the thing about guilt. I was so guilty for so long about everything. Everything. My business coach once asked me like 5 years ago, write down all the things you feel guilty about. Well, that list went on and on and on and on and on and on. And so literally no matter what I did, whether I was doing something great with my kids or with Brian or with work, I couldn't enjoy any of it because guilt choked all the joy out of everything. If our business was succeeding, I felt like I was failing as a mom. If I was doing great as a mom, I felt like our business was failing. You know what I'm saying? There was just never any joy in there. And so I remember saying to my business, so I had a business coach that was women, and I've had a business mentor for like 7 years who's a man. I remember like whining on the phone with him one day and saying, gosh, you know what? Like, I just feel so guilty because I just don't have the time I want with my kids. You know what he says to me? He's like, well, why don't you calendar it? Why don't you stop talking about it and just put a date on the calendar that you're gonna hang out with Blaze every other Wednesday. You're gonna be with Pascaline. And you know what? And I was like, well, I don't wanna do that because I like talking about how guilty I feel more than actually doing something about it. Right? And so it's kind of weird because the moment he said that, and it was so freaking obvious, I was like, well, now I don't have an excuse, right? And so what I've learned in my life about guilt is like this flare that goes up into my heart. And it's a signal that's telling me I'm not in right relationship somewhere in my life. If I feel guilty about not calling my grandma back because I just do, it's not meant to punish me and hammer me down. It's a flare. I've been on the road a lot. Just send her a postcard. She would love to know that you think of her all the time. It's a flare. It's a signal. If I feel guilty about not getting enough time with Pascaline, guilt comes up, now I look at it as, instead of it being this heavy force that's pushing me down to where I can't move, I see it as a flare, and it's like, oh, I'm not in right relationship. There's an action I can take right now. Do I choose to take it, or do I choose to keep that warm blanket of guilt around me that kind of becomes my excuse to not ever take responsibility for anything? Because that's the thing about guilt. If you're guilty, you kind of don't have any responsibility. You're like, well, I just feel so guilty. I can't be held accountable. My guilt is crushing me. Right? What is that? But like, it's totally immobilizing you, because there's all kinds of action steps you can take. But guilt is like, just loves to whisper in your ear. So the next time guilt comes up for you, I want you to think about, what is the flare right now? What is the signal that's going up? Who am I not in right relationship with? And what is one action I can take to just get guilt out of there just like that? I have to tell you, I don't feel guilty anymore. I really don't. Like, I love what I do. And you know what's so crazy about it? Is that in me not feeling guilty, I've freed up my kids. Because when I'm stressed about what I'm doing, they're stressed. But if I feel great about what I'm doing, they feel great. Because if mom's happy, everybody's happy. If mom's not happy, it doesn't matter how anybody else feels, right? So the next weed I want to talk about is perception of ourselves. Perception of ourselves. I know a lot of you have heard parts of my story, how my first book was about my experience of being date raped and how God helped me put my life back together from that. And then my relationship with my dad has been such an incredible, it's the most powerful story of my life, the reconciliation and how he's my biggest cheerleader now. A story that many people, though don't ever hear about my life, is this disease that I had that they found when I was 8. And what it was the disc that was holding my upper and lower jaw together started to disintegrate. And so over time, nothing would be holding my upper and lower jaw. And so they couldn't do surgery until I stopped growing, right? Because they didn't want to do it prematurely and then have to go in and redo it again. By the time I was 16, my jaw had come so far forward and shifted to the side that it pulled my right eye down. My eyes were not balanced. My upper lip was completely gone. And I had never had my cheekbones develop. So I'll just tell you what the kids called me in high school. They called me landslide. My face looked like a landslide in a lot of ways. So when I was 16, I finally stopped growing, and we went in for surgery, and they literally sawed my skull in half. And I have titanium plates and nuts and bolts all through my skull. When I go through security sometimes, it's always just such a joy. And so, but literally they had to restructure my whole face. They had to bring my jaw back, bring the upper part of my skull forward. The doctor leveled out my eyes, and they took bone from my hip and built up my cheekbones and cleared my nasal passages. And then when I woke up from this 10-hour surgery, then I heard the first thing the nurse said to me is, the doctor gave you heart-shaped lips, because he had to reshape my upper lip because it had been totally like pulled under. And I remember that was the most painful physical pain I have ever been through in my life. Childbirth doesn't even touch that pain. And I, went back to school, and the teachers thought I was a new student. People didn't recognize me. And that was also a really difficult time for my dad and I, and him not being able to call me out, but doing the opposite. Can you believe that it wasn't until 10 years later that one day I looked in the mirror and I said, Lord, I don't want to see a landslide anymore. My face looked so different from that surgery on, but every time I looked in the mirror, I still saw that same face. Do you see what I'm saying? It didn't matter that the surgery had happened. It didn't matter that all the scars were on the inside and you couldn't tell. I still carried this perception of myself that I looked like a monster. I remember saying that once to Brian, our second year of marriage, and he was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, I don't want to like wear my hair this way because my jaw comes so far forward. I still believed that my jaw came like really far forward. So one of the reasons I wear like a hairband, there's a few reasons. One is because it keeps my hair out of my face when I'm shooting, and I really like need my hair out of my face so I can focus on the camera. Another reason is because it's been a great way for people to recognize me as we get more and more on TV. They're like, oh, I remember her, the girl with that man. But another internal reason for me is not hiding my face, stepping into the real person that I am, who God's made me to be and who He's shaped me to be. Because it doesn't matter what any doctor did. If I don't believe it, I don't believe it. Do you know what I'm saying? And so that weed that gets into the garden of our heart, that chokes out all the new life and says, well, you're just a rotten old wasted garden. There's nothing that can grow here that's of substance. There's nothing beautiful to gaze on or to look at. And really taking that and going, God, I need you to heal this. Because it doesn't matter how many times my husband says I'm beautiful. It doesn't matter how many times I go to the gym or don't go to the gym. I still have this warped perception of myself that I need you to heal. The next one I want to talk about is lack of intention with our health and our wellness. How many of you have a food allergy? Okay, there's quite a few of you. How many of you think you do, but you don't want to stop eating bread? Right? I really feel like this is a big weed right now in our garden. Like there is so much that we need to do to take care of ourselves so that God can use us fully. Can I just tell you though, for how many years I whined about, I don't want to stop having dairy. I don't want to stop eating bread. I like having lattes. I don't want to be allergic to caffeine. I love shrimp. I'm allergic to shellfish. You gotta be kidding me. I'm allergic to almost everything you can think of except Korean food. Right? Well, I travel, so I can't like eat like that. God's just totally like, pack your Vitamix and just stop whining. Like there's so much that we don't get to engage in with God because we feel sick. We feel tired. We don't feel good. Our attention is more on how like upset our stomach is that we can't even access what He's saying to us. Now, some of us, that's a journey that we're on. Some of us though, and you know who you are, know you need to stop eating wheat. You know that your life would probably be so much better if you cut wheat or if you cut dairy out, but you don't want to because it's your comfort food. Well, then you don't get to whine to God about why He can't say more to you because your attention's so caught up in like trying to feel better as you're eating the next roll that you're eating for bread, right? So I'm kind of being silly, but I'm being serious about it too. Women spend so much time on the way we look that it's almost like it's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a demented way of time of how we're spending on it. There's so much like money that goes into cosmetics and clothing and all these things, and the truth is that no matter what our face looks or no matter what our clothes look like or no matter what weight we are, we still feel sick inside. God really like came to me strongly a few years ago and said, Mira, I'm taking you on to this place where you have to see yourself as an Olympic athlete. You need to train like an Olympic athlete, not like go out there and run 100 miles, right? But you need to like take care of your body the way an Olympic athlete would. You need to take care of your health, your diet, all of these things so that we don't waste time on that kind of stuff and we can get to what I want to do with you that's so fun. So that lack of intention and health and wellness. I think the next one is one of my favorite ones, taking ourselves too serious. God, will you please use me? Please use me. Please use me. Please, 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 please. I'm going to fast for 20 days. Please use me, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but like we need to lighten up a little bit. And we need to kind of take some risks and be kind of silly sometimes. Do you want to know how I met Disney? Can I tell you this story? It is absolutely out of control. I was asked to come to a mommy blogging conference, and to do this conference and do a keynote for them, I was gonna have to go from Vegas, where I was speaking for Sony, and speaking in Vegas is like hell on earth, okay? But I was doing 11 speaking sessions in 4 days for Sony, and then I was gonna have to fly to this mommy blogging conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was like, I'm not gonna have anything to give these women. I can't go. So I told her, I love that you invited me. I'm so honored, but the timing is off. She calls back again, and she's like, a month later, and she's like, I just can't get you off of my mind. I really think you're supposed to be at this conference. And I tell her, I really love that you feel that way. I can't go. So can you believe she calls me back a third time? And she is like, you are gonna think I'm nuts. And she's like, I don't know like where you're at with God or what your religion is, because lots of times I'm out there speaking and it's most 95% of the time it's not in the church. And so she's like, I just have to tell you though that every time I pray about this conference, I see you meeting somebody here. You probably think I'm trying to manipulate you to come to my conference, but that I just have to say it. I said it, I'll leave it. You can do whatever you want. Well, obviously, she has a prophetic word, so I'm getting on a plane and I'm going to Tennessee, right? So we go to this conference, and honestly, like nothing really like that unusual happens. I meet a ton of mommy bloggers who are just a whole story in itself. And I finally just feel like, I look at Brian, I'm like, I feel like we need to head home. And so we decide to actually leave the conference before it's even over, and they're okay with that. I'm done speaking and they feel good. And so we go to the airport in the middle of the day, and nobody's in the airport except for Brian and I and these two women behind us. And so Brian and I fly separate. We fly so much, so we never fly on the same plane. And so we're going through two different security lines, and he's flirting with me like he doesn't know me, and he wants to know if I want to meet him on the other side of security at the bar for a drink. And I'm like, you are so ridiculous, right? And so I'm like, and he's like, well, will you? Well, will you? Well, don't you know you want to? And he's just out of control. So finally I'm like, yes, we can meet for a drink on the other side of security. We get through security and he grabs me, he double dips me, and he gives me this crazy kiss in the middle of the airport. I'm like, what are you doing right now? Okay, two women are trailing behind us. One of those two women drops her bag and she goes, for crying out loud, you're married, aren't you? And I'm like, yes, we're married. I'm not gonna meet a guy I don't know for a drink on the other side of security. And so literally she looks at me and she's like, I'm so depressed about my marriage just looking at you guys. And so Brian has to go catch his flight. So he runs to catch it. And I look at her and I'm like, I have an hour. Tell me what you're depressed about. So for the next hour, we sit down and we talk about her marriage, her sex life, her kids, and we talk about everything. And then they start to board my plane. And I'm like, you never even told me your name, like what you're doing here. I'm here for Disney undercover, looking for a mom to build a brand around. That's how we met Disney. So when we walked into Disney headquarters 3 months later, guess what happened? We walked through the front doors to meet their executive team, and everybody stands up and goes, show us the kiss. So we need to not take ourselves so seriously. God has a plan for your life, and he will make it happen. You know what I'm saying? I don't have an agent. I don't have a brand manager. I had those things and I end up firing all of them because none of them are as passionate about what God wants to do as I know that Brian and I are. You don't need the things that the world tells you to do. You just need to stay on track with God, and he'll direct your steps, and everyone that you're supposed to meet, you will meet. The next weed I want to talk about is expecting instant inspiration. Expecting instant inspiration. I run into this with artists all the time. They're like, oh yeah, I'm working on a book and just not feeling it though today. Not feeling it last week. Haven't been feeling it for 5 years, but I'm gonna write a book, right? Whatever. If I waited for me to feel inspired every time I sat down to create, I would create nothing. You cannot wait for instant inspiration. You don't get to wait for inspiration. You get to sit your butt down and start working on that garden and getting dirty, and then you see life start to grow, right? I can't tell you how many times I meet artists who this is their crutch. They're waiting for inspiration to just like take over, and so they can say this wonderful story about how like, oh, it was all because of this day when this happened and the heavens parted. Oh, goodness. They're not going to do anything. So what I tell photographers one thing and I tell writers another thing. I tell photographers, you need to start by copying other people's work that you love. And photographers in the industry hate it when I say that, because there's this whole thing about copying people's work and blah, blah. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. When Pascaline wants to learn how to play Beethoven on the piano, nobody comes over to our house and says, who does she think she is? She is not Beethoven, right? Nobody says that. But in the photography world, they kind of do that. But where else are you supposed to start? By starting to try to copy something you love that you see. You unpack the photo, figure out where the light source is, figure out how they were facing the light. When I first started, I had this huge scrapbook of all these pictures from magazines, arrows pointing to where the light source was. Where were they facing? Where was the shadow? Trying to get my brain wrapped around a creative art that I had no understanding of, right? Then I would go out and try to shoot it and copy it. And eventually I got bored copying other people's stuff and I started creating my own. As a writer, sometimes I sit down in the morning and I pull out a favorite page by an author I love and I just start typing their page. Because their words and their rhythm of words help me get into the place I need to get into. And by the time I get done to that end of that page, I'm ready to start writing my own stuff, right? So waiting for instant inspiration is a lie. That's like 1 in a million. So many of you have this urge trying to get out of you. There's this thing knocking on your door constantly. Create me. One of the true servanthoods of things of life that you can do for God is to answer that knock and to create it with no guarantee of what the end result will be. You know what I'm saying? It's knocking. I know so many of you in here right now have heard that knock over and over and over again, and you want all your ducks lined up. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that. And half the time when you're halfway through the creative process, you find that you're creating something totally different. But God knew he had to start there with you to get you to go over here, right? The next weed, rejection. So we create something and we put it out there and then it gets rejected, right? How many of us have gone through that? Or we plant something and like, neighbors are walking by and they're like, oh, that didn't go so well for her garden, right? I mean, that feels like rejection. Rejection to me over the years, I've learned, really doesn't mean no. It just means not yet. Or it means not quite. I pitched Oprah's producers for over 2 years. They loved all of my ideas. And every time they rejected me, I fine-tuned what they are needing. You know what I'm saying? I learned from their rejections what it is that I was missing about what they need, right? So rejection is like one of those weeds that grows really tall in our garden and it intimidates us and we try to pull it out and it doesn't want to give. But really, like, rejection is not as strong. When you realize that it's not about saying, oh, you're worthless, it's just about saying not yet or not quite, right? The timing's just not right yet. I want you to just like Think about that the next time you're getting ready to put yourself out there. Because especially when you're creating and you're putting something you have fashioned from your heart, whoa, rejection is right there. Because it's not like a business proposal you're putting out there. It's like something from your very being that you're putting out there. So when they reject it, I see so many artists shut down when they get their first few rejections. Well, there needs to be a tenacity that God builds in you so that when you are in a big limelight, you can deal with people saying all this kinds of junk about you on Twitter, right? Because you've been rejected already a handful of times and you're still going. You haven't given up yet. So I want you to expect rejection. I want you to ask for rejection so that you can build that muscle in your life so that when it does happen, because it will, I guarantee you will be rejected and the things you create will be rejected, but not by the ones who are meant to have it, right? So ask for that experience by taking the risk. Every time I sent out a magazine article that I had written for a different magazine, the moment I got a rejection slip from them, I sent out 6 more. I had them all ready to go so that I didn't dwell on this, oh, nobody wants to hear what I have to say, right? And just totally shut down. I just sent out 6 more. And I had a whole file cabinet of all these rejections. I only need one, though. I only need one yes, right? Okay, another weed that we come up against is disillusionment. We get to this place of where we're doing what we've always dreamed of doing, and we're like, this is it? Right? Or maybe someone that we've looked up to disillusions us. The church disillusions us. And so this bitterness creeps in. Disillusionment sets in, and it starts to rob our ability to have vision. Because we start hearing this voice, oh, it's not going to be like that when you get there. It's not going to be like that. So, honestly, like travel and speaking is not really that glamorous when you really think about it. You know how many strange men have patted me down at airports that I've gotten to arguments with? There's nothing fun about that. It's kind of disillusioning in a sense. But that's part of it. And I feel like God is in that saying, this is work. Where did you hear that your dream wasn't going to take work? Because I never said that to you, Mira. Right? But there's this mindset in so many of us that when we get to our dream, it's going to be like, carefree, I'm living the dream. If you could see my life, what it looks like to live the dream, you may not want my life. You know what I'm saying? I love my life, but it's work. I was up till 2:30 in the morning last night finishing a project that was due for Disney. I did not put that project off. I have not had another chance to do it. So when I came home from speaking with you, I sat down and I started to work on it. There's nothing glamorous about that to me. But that's what living the dream partly is the work that goes into it. It's not always like that, but sometimes it is, right? So disillusionment, not letting that weed get inside of us and tell us things that aren't true. Okay, the last one, and then we're gonna switch gears. The last one is fear of nothing left to dream. I meet a lot of people who have really big dreams, but one of the reasons they're not pursuing them is because they get so much energy and life from just dreaming the dream that they don't want to lose that if they actually achieve the dream. Right? Does that make sense? I don't know if you've ever read The Alchemist, but there is this wonderful character in The Alchemist who sells crystal glasses, and he's always had this dream of doing a spiritual pilgrimage to Mecca. And so the main character, Santiago, is like, well, why don't you do it? Why don't you just go for it? And he's like, oh, because what would I dream of if I did it? That's what gets me through my day. That's what I meditate on and think about and dream of. If I actually went and did it, what would I be left with? God is not that small, right? God is so big. In fact, if your dream seems possible to you, then there really isn't any room for God in that. Your dream should be so impossible so that you can actually give God a chance to show up and show everybody who he is. right? And when you hit that dream, he goes, okay, now I get to show you what we were really working on. And you're like, that looks impossible. And you're like, and he's saying, well, I want to have fun too. If it was all possible, how would I get to show up and get all the credit for everything that's going on with you? Right? So let's talk about tools. I got 9 tools to break through these barriers we've been talking about. How are we doing? Good, because I have 5 minutes, but I'm gonna need more than 5 minutes. Is that okay? Okay. The first one is develop routine. Do we got that slide up there? They're like, oh, good. Develop routine for nurturing you. For nurturing you. This is so important. A garden needs to be nurtured. You need to be nurtured. You are God's garden. You need to have a routine where you spend time every day, every other day, pulling out the weeds that have crept in while you were sleeping during the night. Whether that's going for a walk in the morning, that's one of my routines to nurture myself. Another routine for me is going to hot yoga at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't care what anybody needs from me for work. I sign off 2 days a week and I go and do that yoga class. And that fills me, it gives to me, it nurtures me. So I want to ask you right now, what are things that you're doing routinely in your life to nurture you? Sunday morning's not enough. You know what I'm saying? Journaling like every couple weeks is not enough if you're a writer. One thing I do is I write 3 pages every morning that I can. It's not every morning, right? My religious spirit wants to get in there and say, you're not doing it because you don't do it every morning. But when I can, I write 3 pages. And the reason it's 3 is because it takes 1.5 pages to dump all the junk I woke up with. And then the last 1.5 pages is all about the things that God wants to say to me that I haven't even thought of. And then 3 pages, I'm done. Even if I want to keep going because I build trust with myself, I have other things I got to tend to today. I'll meet you back here again tomorrow, right? So what are routine things that you can be doing for yourself to nurture yourself, to help break through those barriers and those weeds that get into your garden? The next one is finding ways to get uncomfortable. I want you to find ways to get uncomfortable. I don't want you to wait for your life to be uncomfortable. I want you to be in front of the bus, not behind it. Do you know what I'm saying? Owning your own business is uncomfortable. There's feast, there's famine. Then there's famine, and then there's feast, right? It's uncomfortable. What I've learned over the years is that if I would put myself in uncomfortable situations, when this discomfort hits me, I've got a stronger muscle to get through this. Instead of just trying to stay away from anything uncomfortable all the time. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm afraid of heights. I have a really difficult time going down escalators. My kids tease me all the time. I get totally dizzy, and it's like, I can stand up here in front of you, but I can't go down an escalator in an airport, right? So I intentionally got myself to rock climb with my family. I got myself uncomfortable intentionally because I want that sensation of feeling so undone, to not be so alien when it hits me. Do you know what I'm saying? Is that resonating, making sense? I learned to scuba dive. I am so afraid to go underwater that deep and see what's down there. I don't need to see what's down there, right? But my husband really wants to learn, so I said, okay, we're gonna learn to scuba dive. A German guy taught me who doesn't speak a word of English. He speaks Spanish, but I don't understand Spanish. We're in the middle of Thailand, and he's like, jump, jump, jump. And I'm like, I can't do this, I can't do it. Finally, the guy pushes me off the back of the boat. The German guy swims up to me, he sticks the regulator in my mouth, and he says, now we go down. And he lets the air out. And I realize underwater, it doesn't matter what language you talk, you can't hear each other anyway, right? But there's this part where you have to, you're like 30 feet under, and you have to fill your mask up with water. And then you have to learn how to empty your mask of water and just get it all out without panicking. Oh my stars. I cannot tell you how scared I was doing this because it's not like I can just stand up and pop out of a pool, right? I'm 30 feet under. But going through that exercise of filling my mask up with water, I can't breathe through my nose, learning how to empty all of the water to see my husband's big grin, I'm so proud of me, right? It prepares me to deal with the hits that our business takes from out of nowhere. Because I built trust with myself that I can get through things. I'm not a victim. I'm not a doormat. I've done things in my life that have built trust with me that I have what it takes to get through. And the enemy can't take me down as easy as he thought he could. Do you know what I'm saying? Next one, next tool. Choose when to play, when to plant. I wonder if that was supposed to be play. Choose when to plant and when to let your land rest. Choose when to plant and when to let your land rest. My personality wants to plant all the time, but there's a season. Farmers will tell you that you need to let the land rest so that it can produce a harvest in the next season. And I asked a farmer, I was really intrigued by that. I took a personal retreat and I drove out to this farming communities 2 hours outside of Seattle, and I interviewed farmers. And I'm like, tell me how this works. I'm not a farmer. Like, how does the land, the soil, all of this work? And it was so fascinating to me that if they plant the same thing in their fields year after year, they aren't letting the land rest. They have to think about something different to plant because the nutrients that that different thing takes from the land prepares it for the next year's planting. Isn't that interesting? So I have always known in my heart that I don't want to just do things because the world says that's what you should do. That's what I love about Pastor Kathy and Pastor Amy. They're not just doing things for all of you because that's what churches do. Right? They're doing things. They're wanting the land to rest. They're planting new things in it. They're taking chances. They're taking risks. And I've learned that I need to do this with my business. We did a 3-year scholarship. For 3 years, we did a scholarship where Sony and Adobe and all these big companies I got to partner with me would give 3 women the chance to live their photography dream. They would get a year of business coaching, get all the camera gear they needed. Everything would be provided for them. Well, after 3 years of doing that, it was almost at it's just ready to explode in the success it was. But God totally stopped me, and he's like, we're doing something different. We need to let that land rest. Can I just tell you what a failure I felt like? Sony called me. They were totally confused. Why wouldn't you do that? It's been so good. Adobe didn't understand. All these partners didn't get it because it was finally just starting to really go viral. But you can't do something if you don't feel God's release to do it, right? And so I went away for 3 days by myself and I just cried. And I let that land be fallow and I let it rest. And I asked God, what do you want to plant that's new? And in that weekend, God gave me a vision of having teachers that women I would raise up all over the country to start teaching our workshops for me and Brian so that more women could get hands-on-hand mentoring. And so a year and a half later, we have 14 teachers all over the country. 2 of them are in Texas, teaching women in their local communities, giving women confidence through the secret vehicle of a camera, right? But I could have never have gotten to that if I didn't take the risk of letting my land rest and asking God, what do you want to plant? Not what should I plant or what everyone tells me to plant, but what do you want to plant? Okay, the next one is a favorite one of mine. It is, so you can see my notes. It has the first word and then last word cut off. So that's why I keep looking up here because I want to say it right for you. Find ways to practice, especially humble ways. For those of you women here who know that you are called to be a speaker, I want you to find ways to practice that are really humbling. When I first got out of college, I wanted to be an evangelist. I called every church I could think of and asked them if I could come speak. They were like, what are you going to speak about? I don't know. But I'll do a great job. Just let me come and speak. I don't think so. Nobody said yes. So I finally got together and I had lunch with this man who is an evangelist, and he says, if you really want to be an evangelist, you need to go back to school. I hated school. You need to go back to school and get your master's in teaching, because if you can hold the attention of a 7th grade class, any audience after that, you'll be fine in, right? Well, I didn't want to go back to school. I have like every learning disability you could think of. My mom had a sign on our fridge all growing up that a C equals an A in this house, because I never got anything above a D or a C. So I go back to school to get my teaching degree because no church will let me come and speak there. And I teach high school for 7 years. And I'm telling you, you think a tough audience is talking in front of a women's group or a church or whatever. Try talking in front of high schoolers that don't give a rip about what you have to say, right? They don't care. And these high schoolers weren't just like any old high schoolers. They were the ones that were ankle bracelet monitored, that threw the tables over if they didn't like the lesson that day, that called me a bitch several times a day, that told me to F off every single time I gave an assignment. You want to talk about a hard audience, right? But like, you're like a breeze compared to those. I mean, you guys don't even get out of your seat. Half the time they would get out of their seat and be like, I'm done sitting. You'll just have to teach me why I stand, right? So then from there, I got my first book published, and so then I started getting asked to speak. It's funny how that works. You get a book published, and then everyone's like, oh, she knows how to speak. I still didn't really know how to speak, right? But I started speaking, and then eventually I hooked up with Sony, and they asked me to be their spokesperson. Well, guess where they sent me to? The glamorous world of trade shows, ladies. If you've ever been in a trade show, it's basically 20,000 people in a closed room with no windows, walking through like a foreign market, open market. Every single booth is trying to get your attention. So Sony gets up there and they introduce me. There's 30 empty seats in front of my stage. And they're like, Mira's here to talk to you about blah, 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 blah. There's no one sitting in the seats. They're like, let's give her a big hand. I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me. So I get up there and I start having to pull people in to sit down, because all the Sony executives in their suits are in the back, wondering if she's really the right spokesperson for us. Can she pull a crowd in? My favorite is the guy that sits, not even facing me, but he faces the side and sits on a cell phone. And he's just using one of those 30 chairs because he needs to sit down. But can I just tell you that all that practice makes it so easy for me to fill my space with you, right? All of it. Do you know where I was last week? You're gonna get a kick out of this. I was in Chicago speaking in a mall. In a mall, in an atrium. Sony sent me to Chicago to an electronics store out there that wanted me to do a talk for Mother's Day. I walk in and there's dishwashers lined up on sale. I'm like, I cannot be in the right place right now. This does not make any sense to me. Microwaves are on sale. I mean, I don't even know if there's cameras in this store. I'm so confused. They lead me out into this atrium. There's this huge water fountain display going on with this little stage in front of it. Basically, I have a mini Bellagio in Vegas behind me that they are unwilling to cut off while I'm speaking in front, right? I just kept thinking of Blaze the whole time, because Blaze said to me before I got on the plane, Mom, it's Blaze, okay? He's my sweetie. He's like, Mom, you're so famous when you're speaking in a mall. You know you are. I can't believe you can speak in a mall. If I walked into a mall and saw someone speaking, I would be so blown away. It's incredible, Mom. He sees his mom on TV. He sees his mom do all this, but speaking in a mall is like blowing his mind. And I just took Blaze with me, right? So I want you to find humble ways to practice what you're called to do. You don't get to have like this desire to speak and come up to Pastor Kathy and Pastor Amy and say, can I do next year's keynote? If you haven't like earned your time in the trenches. Do you know what I'm saying? You need to earn your hours working out your craft so that when you get up in front of a big group, you don't have to think about what you're doing because you've done it over and over and over again. It's your muscle memory. So for those of you who are in the trenches, take heart. It's not gonna be like that forever. I'm gonna email all of you when I don't have to speak in malls anymore, and we'll celebrate together in cyberspace. But I know that God's the only one that can graduate me from that place, right? For some reason, I'm still doing the dog and pony show, but God has a reason for it. And right before I left for Chicago, Brian said, I really was praying this morning. I feel like God's sending you to Chicago. I thought, that's so sweet. He's totally trying to encourage me because he knows I don't want to go speak in a mall, right? And so I'm like, honey, you're so sweet. And he's like, Mira, no, I'm serious. I really feel like God's sending you to Chicago. The night before I leave Chicago, at in the evening after I'm all done, Oprah's executive vice president messages me and says, do you want to come to Harpo Quarters 9 o'clock tomorrow morning and spend time together? God sent me to Chicago, right? We spent almost 2 hours together. I've been trying to get a meeting with this woman for 3.5 years. I have stayed in Chicago overnight. I have changed my flight just because she thought she was going to be able to meet, and then it's fallen through. God's timing, right? So I'll go talk in an atrium in a mall. If I get to talk to Oprah's executive vice president, I can do that. Okay, the next one. We hit on this, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this, but we talked about it last night, rest and unplug. As much as I'm on the road, I've learned that I need to take 2 nights to myself and go somewhere that only Brian knows where I'm at, and I unplug. I completely unplug, and ladies, the first time I did it, I cried the whole way. Brian walked me to the car, and I was like, but I don't need to rest. I'm fine. I don't need to go weekend. I've been gone so much. She's putting my stuff in the car. I know, honey. I know you don't need to rest. And I'm driving. I've got the windows rolled down. I really don't need to rest. I can stay here. I'm not tired. It's ridiculous, right? And so I literally showed up at this hotel. The first time I did this, no one knew where I was but Brian. There was no agenda but whatever I felt like doing. I slept till 1 o'clock the first morning in the afternoon. I had no idea how tired I was. And then I just walked through this small town. I just meandered and wandered. And you know what I realized? I realized how lonely I was for myself. I realized that I hadn't spent time with just me. I really like me. And it had been forever since I'd hung out with me. Do you know what I'm saying? I also have this rule where at 10 o'clock at night, we don't get online and we don't talk about financials. Because nothing good happens after 10 o'clock at night. By 10:04, I've looked at 5 photographers' websites, and I've completely convinced myself to never pick up a camera again. Right? And look at what I'm shooting and the credentials that I have. I still feel like that because I'm so tired by 10 o'clock at night. Nothing good happens. And we don't talk about money either because nothing good happens out of that conversation after 10 o'clock at night. So resting, unplugging, being selfish, ladies, being selfish so you have something to give, so you can pour out. The next one. Seeking counsel, even paying for counsel, because you value your growth. You got some amazing resources in this church body of business coaches. Jill, right over here, where she was right over there. She's an amazing business coach, incredible experience working for Zig Ziglar all those years. But we resist paying for it. You know what I mean? Well, if it doesn't cost you anything, guess what? You're just not gonna value it. One of the biggest commitments we've made, even when we didn't know how to put food on the table, was business coaching and counseling for our marriage and our family. We've had the same counselor for 16 years. He's our secret weapon. Our kids have seen him. Everybody knows Roger. My parents have seen him. And when my grandma turned 80, she walked in and said, what else can I learn about myself? that just having wisdom in your life, investing in it, paying for it, I just figure we're gonna have an ongoing balance with our counselor for the rest of our lives. He's okay with it, I'm okay with it, and we'll just do that, right? But I need counsel and wisdom in my life, right? So investing in that is one of the biggest weed killers I have ever found. It's crazy to me how all my chaos and craziness I can spew out and say in a counseling session, and Roger will look at me and say this one sentence that's like worth $1 million. And I'm like, why couldn't I have just seen that myself and saved myself the money? Well, because I'm in it. I'm on the field. I need a coach who's on the sidelines that can see the big picture and tell me strategically where I'm going and what I need to watch out for. That is one of the best things you can spend money on for yourself, is counsel. Know your financials intimately. I can't tell you for how long I use the excuse, well, I'm an artist. I don't want to know how much we need to make every month because that'll totally suffocate my ability to create. Right? Come on, that is such an excuse. But it took God really slamming me with it and going, you are completely using that as your crutch. You're telling everybody that I don't want to know how much money we need to make to, pay our bills this month because then I won't be able to create. And he's like, well, who do you think helps you create? Your bank account or me? Right? And so I started getting aggressive about it. I started meeting with our bookkeeper, with our accountant every month. I would not let Brian come. I sat down with them. I asked them to teach me what a profit and loss statement is. Teach me what a balance sheet is. Teach me all of this stuff that I've said for so long. I don't need to learn. I'm the artist in the family. I need to know it because God said real direct to me, Mira, your business will only grow as far as you intimately know how it grows. And that just shook me to the core. Now, 3 years later, every Thursday morning, I get a report. It's a financial summary report that I've put together and asked our bookkeeper for. She tells me where everything is at, what is doing well, what is not doing well, what money needs to come in, who's not paying us, how late they are, who is paying us. I know intimately every week without having to ask my husband what is going on. And can I just tell you the freedom it's given me? And I learned that you get to be creative with your finances, but you first have to know what's going on with your finances, right? Okay, almost done, ladies. Your pain is your strength. Your pain is one of your greatest tools. Your pain is one of the most powerful things you have in life. To weed out the barriers, to weed out all the icky stuff that's toxic in your garden. I always, date rape is one of those things that you would never think you'd want to talk about because there's so much shame around it. But when we started shooting weddings, there was 5 years where we shot $1 million weddings all over the country. Part of my bio that every bride read was how I had gone through this recovery process of date rape and written this book. Well, guess who it drew to me? It drew brides to me that had experienced some kind of emotional trauma. They were having $1 million weddings, but they needed someone to walk them through the most emotional day of their life to that point because they had gone through something. Your pain is not meant to be hidden. It's not meant to be all out there and you know what I mean, exhausting everybody. That's what your counselor's for. You don't burn your friends out. You see your counselor, and then you process all this wisdom with your friends, and that makes them want to hang out with you more because they feel like, oh, I don't need to go to counseling. I'll just go to coffee with Mira, right? But you don't burn your friends out on all of your pain. That's not what they're there for. But your pain is your greatest strength. It is the greatest thing that God is giving you, that the enemy has spent your whole life trying to tell you is worthless. My whole first 20 years of my life, my dad did not like the sound of my voice. My voice has been come against over and over and over again, whether it was being sexually victimized, whether it was my dad didn't want to hear it ever, whatever it is. Isn't it amazing the tool I carry that God uses the most is my voice. It's great. I can't tell you how many people say to me after I get done speaking at a big photography or conference, there's something like that lulls me about your voice. I could just listen to your voice. And it's so weird to me because that's totally the thing that the enemy has tried to destroy for so many years. But God knew it and he kept it. And even though it went through all this pain, he preserved it. What in your life has the enemy come at you again and again and again and again? I have a feeling that's your greatest tool. That's your greatest sword. What is that the enemy has relentlessly come at you against trying to rob? Okay, last one. Leap. Leap again and again and again and again. I have this picture, I'll show you, this baby bird that was in our apple tree in our backyard. And I am not kidding you, there was all this squawking going on. And all of a sudden we look up and we see this baby bird with these little toothpick legs. Look at those little toothpick legs. He's gotten out of his nest, his feathers are all ruffly, and he's about ready to leap. And I'm thinking, there is no way he's gonna fly because he's just so fragile. You know what I mean? But his brothers and sisters are cheering him on in the nest and they're like ready to go next. And I just am looking at this baby bird and he literally just takes the leap. He leaps and he goes right down into like the hedge. He doesn't hit the ground, he goes into the hedge. And you can just see him breathing. He's like breathing so hard. He's trying to catch his breath. And then he leapt again. And then like he was like in this bush, like 3 feet away. And then he leapt again. And I just thought, isn't that amazing? It's not about one leap. It's about leaping again and again and again and again. Because let me tell you something, okay? Listen, if nothing else, hear this. Not falling is not the same as flying. And God wants you to fly. But so many of you are focused on not crashing and not falling. That's not flying, ladies. That's not flying. You need to leap again and again and again until your wings get so strong that you're like the hummingbird in the new Disney movie. Have you seen this hummingbird? He's following a bumblebee, and the bumblebee is flying like this, and the hummingbird is barrel rolling with it. Hummingbird isn't even thinking about flying. It's an acrobatic dancer in the sky. It's insane. I want to fly like that. I don't want to think about how to fly. I want to fly and I want to soar and I want God's wind to come and take me and blow on my garden and let that fragrance go out and me just soar with effortlessly. You know what I mean? Effortlessly. But I've got to leap again and again and again until I'm not afraid of leaping anymore. Because not falling is not flying. It is not the same. And you will know when that transition happens. You will feel it in your spirit. You will leap and you will not be afraid of crashing because you'll be so excited about flying. You know what I'm saying? There's a huge difference, and that's what we're working towards. We're working towards leaping again and again and again so that we're not afraid of crashing the whole time. You've seen those birds, right? They're like, I just hope I don't. I have a bird that keeps trying to fly through my kitchen window. It's the most bizarre thing. I kept telling Brian, we need to let it in. I feel like the Lord is trying to say something to us. And the moment I said that, Brian looked at our 30-pound cat and said, I think the cat agrees with you. We're not letting that bird in our house. But I'm not joking. It keeps like hitting its, it just keeps trying to fly through our window. And I realized, like we read online that it sees its reflection. And so it's doing, I don't know, it's doing something weird. But I'm just thinking about how it's not flying though. It keeps hitting this barrier. It's not flying. I want you to fly. God wants you to fly. He doesn't want you to live in fear of crashing. The crazy thing about crashing is that once you start flying, you realize that the ground that you were afraid to crash into is actually a myth. There is no crashing with God. There isn't any. But you're not going to believe that until you finally leap, and you leap, and you leap, and you leap, and you leap. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for this time together. You knew I had so much I want to share with these ladies, more than what I could fit in last night. And I thank you for the honor of being able to be with them again today and to speak with them. And as they go into our afternoon break, I pray, God, that you would just let these things saturate in the soil of their heart. Thank you, Lord, for just pushing us to leap again and again and again, for teaching us how to fly. Amen. Thank you. Thank you.